I'm the new site director here in Bedford, so I'm very excited to have these opportunities early on with my time here. I've only been here 4 months, so we're just definitely getting the ball rolling pretty quickly.
And I like to refer to Christy as our energy buddy. You know, she's a wonderful mother, she's passionate about art, full of energy, and I think she's going to do great things for Bedford. Please.
I just wish she had more enthusiasm.
Yeah.
I'd like to welcome you today. We do have a few very special guests today. Justin Genther is the director of Falling Water, and it's great to have this guy here. You know, Falling Water now is a World Heritage Site, and I believe that process took
20 years, I think, almost 20 years.
I was going to say 7.
Yeah, almost.
And Jenny is Vice President of Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and nice to have him here. And I might say it's about 25 years to the day that I had a one-person exhibition at Falling Water.
That's right.
And it was the first one they ever did. And since that time, they're having exhibitions 1 or 2 every year.
We try to do 1 or 2.
Of course, I was in the bar.
You were at the bar.
They didn't have the gallery built at that time. But they have a nice gallery. And this young man is, Steve George, is responsible for our Bedford site here. I told a couple of people I had a heart attack, and the day after my heart attack, he said, I have to see your husband. It was a Friday afternoon. And my wife said, my husband had a heart attack last night, and he won't be home before this afternoon. And Steve said, that's okay, I'm coming over. He did not give an alternative. And Steve and I met for 15 minutes maybe, and we had to have a proposal into the Bedford board that Monday, and during the interim I had to arm twist the board of the Southern Alleghenies Museum of Art and say, we are going to do this. I wasn't on the board, but they couldn't say no. And Tom Keppel over here, another young man who is with us, Tom, past president of Juniata College, and did a fabulous job at Juniata College, both he and his bride, Pat. And while he was president of Juniata College, I think the college was the recipient of about maybe 13 of my paintings. Correct. And this piece over here, the lotus, the Imperial Lotus, was donated to them from the Markov collection. And the lotus was actually in my garden in Hollidaysburg. But the tuber for this lotus came from when they opened Tutankhamun's tomb. They sent seeds all over the world. Penn State was the only institution that was able to propagate one of the seeds. And that lotus is a tuber from that original seed. And Racy Dolan, I have to acknowledge Racy Dolan, she's here. Racy was significantly responsible for the garden that we put out here. Not only did she help raise the money for it, but on the 3 days that Racy and Dean Lemley and myself, we did the garden, designed every inch of it on our hands and knees, like bricks, etc. But anyhow, I'm glad everyone is here. And before I go on, I want to say I welcome questions. Your questions will make what I have to say more interesting because I want to adapt to your questions. What I'd like to talk a little bit about today is how I organized this exhibition and why I paint, what I paint, some of the influences in my career. First and foremost, let me say I probably have done about maybe 2,000 paintings, drawings and paintings, and there are about 78 pieces here. So I attempted to adapt this beautiful space for some of the pieces that I have done. And I will say the space is so exquisite. I've seen exhibitions in Loretto, moved here, scaled back. But there's an intimacy with this space because of the beautiful fireplaces and things of that nature that I think you can almost enjoy the art better because it's not as big and you really can be one with the art. The planning for this exhibition began over 3 years ago, and because of COVID and a few other logistical issues, the exhibition got delayed. But during the interim, for the first time in 57 years, I did a whole series of drawings that I thought would be important to exhibit with this work to demonstrate how important and significant drawing is to the type of art that I do.
Yeah.
Not that I draw like this for my still lifes or my landscapes, but I intentionally did these just to show the importance of drawing. And unfortunately, there are art schools today, prestigious art schools today, that aren't even teaching drawing. I got an MA from Indiana University, and at that time, I'll never forget, there was a student from Carnegie Mellon, graduate in their art department in painting, that could not draw. He was failing our graduate drawing class. But just amazing. Something else that's sort of unique and interesting about this exhibition, my wife and I are living in Florida for 6 months a year. We are Floridians. My roots will always be Western Pennsylvania, but especially the landscapes. But the Florida light, flora, and fauna are very different than ours. And some of these pieces, like this, the lighting behind this, and the flowers themselves, the essence of Florida. We live in Naples, Florida. In Naples, it's like living in one giant botanical garden. It is flawlessly maintained. It is a man-made garden. You know, coming over here today, seeing all the beautiful hills, you know, I said to Margaret, you know, we don't see this in Florida. There's nothing prettier, nothing prettier. But the light, there in the winter, it is very special. In addition, because of the breakup of the 7 different galleries, I have never exhibited my non-objective work alongside my still lifes, florals, and landscapes. But because of the breakup of space, there are components that I have done that are genuinely a 25-year survey. Any questions? And please, questions? Any? So the exhibition has some unique characteristics. It was adapted to this space, and there are some, as they say, unique features. Why do I paint? When I was 4 years old, I had some major experiences, major things happening to me that have stuck with me all my life. Christmas, when I was 4 years old, I got a big, giant box of crayons. And I don't know whether any of you remember them. They were like 6 across and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers. That was my singular gift compared to what the kids get today. But anyhow, that was just amazing. It was like a gift from God. I covered everything there was to cover at that time. And I am left-handed, but I went to a parochial school, and this hand and this, at that time, were sort of marks of the devil. So I wasn't permitted to use my right hand until I was in 4th grade to write. Or, I mean, my left hand. I had to use my right hand until I was in 4th grade. And, but nobody ever challenged my using the crayons on my left hand. That was permissible. And the parochial schools were known for promoting conformity, but not necessarily creativity. And I did survive that. And the crayons were, it became my second language. And a language that was much more adapted to who I am. And my symbols of flowers and trees and grass grew out of those crayon marks. And I might say that when I was in high school, my German father said mechanical drawing was more important than any drawing course or art course you could possibly take. And at the time I objected to that, but to do bases like this requires precision mechanical drawing, and the type of drawing that I might never have received in a drawing class. So that has stayed with me, and the same German father, when I went to college, said, you can study art when you can pay for it. So in my junior year, I started taking as many art courses as I could. However, before that time, I could draw and I could paint. I learned to do that independently on my own. So I can honestly say I never came under the influence of any professor, because I felt that I could draw as well as they could, and I could paint as well as they could. And even when I later on in my life, when I pursued an MA in painting from Indiana University, I never had a professor who demonstrated. I never learned any special techniques. I structured independent studies consistently, whether it was painting on a wet surface or painting on hot press illustration board or using dyes or some theme that I pursued, but I set the parameters of the problem, and they would act somewhat as mentors. I would take pieces to them, and but I've had very little instruction. So I've always been self-motivated, self-disciplined, and that's what true education is all about anyhow, to be motivated and being able to evaluate your work. And very important in my paintings, you know, they continuously challenge what I understand and attempt to know, whether it's about life, love, death. I mean, all of those issues can be embraced in my work. There's a painting at the entrance that's a bouquet for C, a woman who I love, and I knew for years and still impacting my life. In that still life when she died, I put all flowers that had special significance related to her into that painting to try to adapt and to her life and her death. As well as like a painting, like the large still life over there is a bouquet for him. That's a special celebration related to him, meaning Margaret, my wife. And did I introduce her? I didn't introduce her. My wife, responsible, without her, clerical assistance, culinary assistance, and love, this exhibition would not have
And your word of politics.
What do I paint? What do I paint? That same 4-year-old experience. When you think of how kids are treated today, or not treated, my uncle, I had 2 uncles that were fabulous gardeners. One uncle introduced one of the magnolias, starburst magnolia. Now that's a southern magnolia, that drawing over there. And another uncle just loved individual flowers. And I never met anybody that could get as excited as he got related to like a pansy. He'd say, Michael, and I'm only this big. Look at this pansy. And he was very eccentric, and I loved it. And he gave me, when I was 4 years old, a 5-cent pack of zinnia seeds.
What?
Zinnia seeds. And my mother, product of the Dewey system, you learn by doing, you learn by trial and error. I planted these zinnia seeds under an apple tree. They were doomed not to bloom. However, when those 2 little leaves popped out of the ground, and I'm 4 years old, and I planted them, I thought it was miraculous. And they were mine. Like I created these. That love of gardening has stayed with me all my life. And I will also say that when I was 4, and my mother read 3 books a week, and we were never enough. Like, what are you doing in the house? She used to go upstairs and pound on the floor and pretend she was doing something, and she'd be up there finishing a book. So anyhow, I spent half of my life in a creek, and there was a woods nearby, and there was a time where there was a tree that was cantilevered out over the little pine creek, and it would flood like 8 feet high. I would crawl out on top of that tree to watch the floodwaters, 8 feet deep. She had no idea where I was. And, but anyway, I got to experience nature, all the senses, winter, spring, summer, frequently by myself, and that love of nature and respect for it has stayed with me all my life. Paintings in here are principally still lifes. And I directed the Southern Alleghenies Museum of Art for 24 and a half years. And at that time, I did a lot of the installation work in Loretto. And Loretto had 30-foot high ceilings. And we always had wonderful preview dinners, good old days, preview dinners. And I always did all the flower arrangements. Every table had a beautiful flower arrangement. Like we pulled these things together in about 2 minutes when I came in. But every table had flower arrangements, and sometimes 12, 15 feet in the air. They were wonderful. So still lifes, to me, were usually part of a celebration, as well as intricately related to an art celebration. So I started doing the still lifes as part of that art and celebratory kind of process. And these paintings very definitely reflect that 24 plus years of doing still lifes. And that love of flowers. Most of the flowers that I do, I either will raise or purchase. I don't use photographs. The still life is in front of me, and sometimes something like this, the flowers are dead, and I sometimes have to replace them. I don't go to nature to duplicate what I see. I go to nature for the idea and for the beauty, and I try to share that knowledge of what I experience. And there's a variety of them. The still life over here, I listen to music all the time in my studio. The black and white still life. That painting was inspired by Russian Orthodox music.
Looks like it.
I can listen to it all day. And Margaret is so thankful that my studio is not in the house. Margaret can handle about an hour, but not 6 or 8 hours. But anyway, when I did that painting, again, Russian Orthodox music, the marble slab was to represent the Romanovs, the little panther, the communist takeover of the monarchy, the Easter eggs there to represent the Russian people. The white eggs, to me, always a symbol of new life. And I donated this painting in honor of Ed O'Brien to the museum. Ed O'Brien was a trustee of the museum. Wonderful, wonderful man. He loved art, he loved music. So when he died, I gave that painting to the museum in his honor. There's a Mapplethorpe plate that I own, that's in that painting, and that's a Paloma Picasso vase. You know, a lover of art, a lover of music, and the bittersweet on top of Crescent Mountain where he lived. And there were all kinds of pheasants. He's on a big place up there. So anyway, I thought that was a wonderful tribute to him. Some of these pieces I've studied, when you can see these Japanese flower reaching, ikibanas. And I was doing ikibanas like that, that's somewhat oriented to it. But another influence on my work. Any questions about what you see here?
This is not a question about what we see here necessarily, except all of you
Yeah,
are. But these stories that you're telling us make the art come alive.
Thank you.
And thank you. And one of the things I've always wanted, whether it's my art show or anybody else's art show, is to have a tiny bit of the story attached to it, next to it. Some museums do that, I know.
They are doing it. They've started doing it in Loretto with, there's someone who was just hired who's a computer whiz kid, whatever. I thought he was going to interview me, and but
For this show?
yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Some of the paintings I do here are things that I own and value as well. Like this young lady owns this piece, and it's a fabulous Japanese ceramicist, and I have it in my home in Naples. And Debbie saw that piece, fell in love with it, took it right off my wall, and took it home with her. But I paint things like these Chinese vases. We collect a lot of Chinese artifacts. So I paint things that I attempt to understand. Some of the fauna, the birds, are definitely a little Florida oriented. This piece over here, when 911 hit, I was just devastated. And I thought, what can I do? And I was so depressed. And I went, I thought, how can I artistically respond to that? Well, I went into fields and did 4 paintings of Pennsylvania indigenous wildflowers. And I thought, regardless of what happens after 911, these wildflowers are going to be here regardless. And so I did a whole series of those paintings of Pennsylvania wildflowers. Would you like to go upstairs and around? Okay. We will have lunch here after our tour. So let's, how about if we come here and I'll stand on top of the steps and you stay down here.
I didn't know if we were around there, so
Yeah.
absolutely.
Hi folks, how are you? You're welcome to join the tour. I mentioned that my father wouldn't let me study art until I could pay for it. So as a consequence, I have multiple degrees in education. And I used to be a principal. I was the youngest principal in a tri-county area. I was a principal, I think, at the age of 24. I was a supervisor for the University of Pittsburgh's Model School. And I went to St. Francis as an assistant professor in their education department. got an MA in painting that year, and it was the first year I ever had off in the summer, but I carried 18 credits, and I considered that recreational. But anyway, as soon as I got that master's, the MA in painting, they asked me to be chairman of the fine arts department. So I was teaching drawing and painting and a whole slew of education courses, carrying 18 credits in those days. You know, today I have a niece who's a Chinese scholar. If she thinks she teaches 6 credits, you know, it's like overload. But anyhow, when teaching drawing and painting, I tried to expose the students to realistic elements as well as abstract and non-objective elements. So I thought I had a responsibility of sharing with students work that I was doing, both representationally as well as in an abstract manner. Now I mentioned that I set up themes or an idea that I try to pursue. This series, and I wish I would have hung these a little bit different because you can see the connection. This series of abstract pieces were based on Stravinsky's Firebird.
Oh, yeah.
How about that?
And as I did about 6 or 8 of them, and as I continued doing them, they became increasingly abstract and, you know, to the point where non-objective. Now, I don't know whether anybody knows that there's a Firebird in that, but the music of the Firebird impacted that. The piece over the desk there, I call that my French song. What's the name of that piece?
French Reflection.
French Reflection. I hate titling pieces. But anyway, French Reflection. What makes it French? You know, maybe the colors, whatever. But that painting, I did a whole series of those using fingerprints. And it was also interesting. The museum at one time did an exhibition called Positive ID. And some of the artists put their fingerprints in their paintings. And I thought, ooh, neat idea. So anyway, there was a series, I've done of those. And that's a combination of watercolor and oil-based ink. And the oil-based ink, you can put on top of watercolor, but you can sort of put some watercolor on top of the oil-based ink, but you have to take all the ink off. So you run a brayer and one sheet after another of paper to take all the excess oil from the oil-based ink. But it's interesting process to paint. Pieces like over here on this wall, these are the small pieces. I started with a little element of collage. And like this is a piece of cutout paper and a cutout paper, and there's a little piece of cutout paper that in that I decided there was going to be one little piece of paper in there, the same colors, the same images, but I was going to vary the theme, and each one a little bit different, and just to see how many pieces like that I could create before I got bored. And by the way, I did these, and I do them in January and February, especially living in Pennsylvania. In January and February, a little hard to go outside and paint. And the flowers and things are minimal access, and that's not the case now, but then, and I just finished 2 pieces like this one, because when I saw these, and this one as well, I just left them like, oh my God, what has happened to my fingers? So I went back and started doing a couple pieces related to these. The pieces on the top of the steps, I was organizing an exhibition of Native American art, and I was out in Arizona. And just sort of experiencing that environment and whatever, and I came home, and this was sort of a reflection of that experience. And some of the little tail ends of Maybe like abstracted feathers, whatever, I don't know. But anyway, that was a consequence of that visit. When we go up and around the steps, there's two pieces up here. I love New Orleans jazz. And it's very hard to sit still and paint listening. So I'm dancing around and, but I'm always listening to music when I do stories. And sometimes the music dominates the piece. And we'll go up. Any questions? Yes?
Your headspace has seemed to be in a completely different place to paint this way versus the galleries we were just in. Can you speak a little bit?
It's a break. It's a break. Some of those still lives take 2.5 weeks. And the way and there's a strong Asian influence there with the white of the paper. I had a cat once that I had a red brush loaded with paint on the table. The cat comes up, jumps, and hits that brush, and the painting was finished. Oh my God, there goes 3 weeks work, but nothing hit the paper. So the still lifes, the landscapes you'll see upstairs, they're thin air pieces. They take, some of those are 3 weeks on location, 6 to 8 hours a day. Like that landscape, that's 2 weeks. So these are every bit as challenging, but they all come from my head rather than what I'm trying to interpret. And it's a relief. Yes?
And you don't use brisket of any kind, do you?
I don't use one?
Brisket, the stuff that reserves the white?
No. And the reason why I don't, at one time I did. And guess what happens after 25 years with that stuff?
Does it
turns yellow.
The spot where it was turns
Yes.
yellow? Oh.
Yes. And I've seen some of my early paintings and I am embarrassed. Yeah, it turns yellow. No gimmicks, no splashing around, it's just straight green. And the white of the paper, I don't use white paint. There's one painting upstairs that I use white paint. I'll show it to you. But I preserve the white of the paper. I consider the white of the paper, I consider the paper sacred. The first brush stroke to me is like the beginning of life, a new life. So each of my landscapes or these, they take on a life of their own. I have breakfast with them. I have lunch with them. We have cocktails.
I was gonna say, you have wine o'clock with them.
I work on one painting at a time.
Wow.
Just one painting, and it's like a giant puzzle. I don't pre-plan the painting, they're not drawn out like a drawing. It's just one piece over another, and it's like a giant puzzle. And when I'm finished, it is done, and I barely identify with it. The next piece of white paper, your whole reputation, who you are, what you know, is on the line. Doesn't matter any difference what you have done. It's always a new challenge. And the discipline is what separates, I think, the amateur artist from the professional. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of art majors coming out of schools every day in the United States. Many are called and very few are chosen. Because they're too dependent upon the professors, in my humble opinion, and they're not self-motivated, and they don't know how to discipline themselves to continuously produce. Yes?
I hate to show my ignorance since I don't
No,
really
every
know
question is
art.
wonderful.
I'm wondering, do you in your mind see the shape and adjust the color, or are you seeing color first, or does it just flow all together?
It's the first mark. The first mark starts the process. And like,
Talk us through how it would grow, if you,
how would it grow?
where you start across
Now,
the
for
line.
example, this might be a contour line. You know, I can't go from black to yellow. I mean, I can't go from yellow, you know. Once something is this opaque, that's it.
It's done.
So, I usually work, and it's easier to explain, maybe I can explain it better in this one. This might have been done first. And some of these fingerprints across here. And they just, it just pieces together, you know, basic schizophrenia. It comes out of my head. Or the piece I'm working on right now, I just finished 2 pieces that I really liked. And I'm thinking, oh, where am I gonna go from here? I'm tired of doing this. And again, this little display here is, I'm making a series of pieces because of it. And there was a pillow that I saw on our outdoor porch that was striped, all kinds of stripes. And then it had this little area where it was pieced together. And I liked that little line, and I like these lines. And I said to my wife, I said, ooh, I like that. And that's how I began the piece that I'm working on. Now, if I were to show you that and say this was the beginning, you'd think he's nuts. You wouldn't see the relationship. But they have to start somewhere. But they're like a big puzzle. And it's not how people teach painting. You know, I work from the front to the back, or the foreground to the background. They teach painting just the opposite. But I work on a dry surface. I used to work on a wet surface. When I directed the museum, I had a major exhibition at the University of Iowa, 60 wet into wet watercolors. And I would sketch for 6 hours a scene. Then I'd work on a wet surface, limit myself to an hour and a half. Good French art paper, soaked and totally saturated. When it was dry, that was the end of the painting. When I retired from the museum at the age of 55, suddenly I had more time where I painted at night and quickly. Now I was able to paint during the day and spending as much time as I wanted.
Michael, when do you know you're finished?
Very good question. And that's a struggle,
Yeah.
especially in watercolor. Because the minute you get one muddy, blackish, brown, whatever, that it's overworked, it's done. But I only sign my work when I consider it done. So I have pieces that I have not signed.
So they're still working.
No, they're done.
They're done.
I'm not going back to those.
Have an auction.
What's that?
The done pieces.
But that's a good question. And, you know, I live with it. Like the painting I'm working on right now, you know, I brought it up from my studio. It's in the middle of the living room floor. I got up today, went down the steps, I look at it. You know, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to say today, you know, blah, 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 blah. Coffee, passing it, I'm looking at it. And there's an area in there that I cannot figure out what I want to do. I cannot. But by continuously looking and thinking and trying to resolve it, it will come together. I've only ripped one painting to shreds. I just could not. I mean, when I spend 2 weeks on something, by God, it better work. You know,
Right.
somehow. But only one painting have I ever. And then I even tried to make a painting out of that. I tried to glue them onto another surface and evolve another piece. Didn't work.
Right.
Let's come upstairs. And be careful, and these are original, fabulous stairwell. And I'm gonna open this door, I want you to see. There's another wonderful porch up here that we use for parties that are just great.
Good view of the art.
Yes, nice view of the garden. Yes. We'll come into this room just for a couple minutes, and then we'll go into another room. Anybody in?
No, they're still coming.
They used to be my guest
Yeah, right.
in Loretta. Really? Yeah.
Looks like a classroom.
This piece actually isn't properly named, but I got tired of naming them, and it was just, but anyway, I don't like them. But this piece evolved, years ago I did a circus thing in Loretto, and this was a result of what I felt about the circus element. I mean, you're just bright colors or sort of frenzied, happy excitement, and that's what evolved out of that. I have a niece who's a fantastic quilter. Something I couldn't do if my life depended on it. Zip, 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 never. However, I was inspired by her quilts, and I took sort of some traditional kinds of quilt patterns, and I thought, you know, I'm going to do a whole series of paintings sort of inspired by quilts. And these are 2 examples. And I might have done 10 of these, you know, maybe 8. By 8, I'm tired. But I'll think of an idea and I try to run with it until I'm tired of doing it. But this is one of those French pieces. Again, my fingerprints. Boom, 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 boom. Oil-based ink. And then I run a brayer on top and a brayer over these. And even this color here, that's oil-based ink and that's watercolor. The oil-based ink will resist the pigment under it. Now, I might have to put 8 sheets of paper to take off the ink, but it's a great process. I was going to demonstrate this at a workshop, but it was this exhibition has been anyway. Let's go across the hall and we'll take a look at some of the landscapes. Yes, questions?
Sally saw, well, anyway, both of us
What's that?
Kaleidoscope. I love that.
And this is just,
Makes you dizzy.
you can say, how does something like this begin? I took a pencil and just scribbled a line all through there. And then, again, when I was a kid, 4 years old, and scribbled with crayons, not too far different. But I'm using paint. Yes?
Did you do anything when you were 5 years old?
Did I do what? What was your question? What? I didn't hear it. What did you say?
Did you do anything when you were 5 years old?
Oh, did I do anything?
4 years
No, you know, four was a big year, and I mentioned that today because I'm sure there's grandparents here. They're the formative years.
Yeah.
And we have neighbors who live beside us, and I have a beautiful garden, 2.5 acres of flower gardens, and they have a big yard, big, beautiful yard. They have 4 kids. I have only seen them outside. They've lived there for, I don't know, 15 years. And the kids are all grown, you know. And they have he runs a business, so he has a party for his staff. I know they have these big blow-up things where the kids were going down slides and, you know, but it's the only time I saw them out all year. And I thought, how sad. You know, the youngest son is an artist. I have an art gallery, beautiful, gorgeous art gallery. It's an in-car garage, and it's surrounded by gardens. And I said to the kid that's, you know, the art major, hello, come down, anytime.
Never. Never.
And he thinks he's an artist. And guess what kind of future I think he has? Not one in art. No. And the parents, you know, every once in a while they show, you know, he's a potter and they show some little stinky pot that he's made. Oh, I got it. Fabulous, you know.
What a knob.
Exactly. Just overindulged. And I mean, I still cannot believe, you know, and they're all like this. When I was a principal, at the age of 24, my cry to my teachers was, turn off the blasted televisions. 50-some years ago, the average lovely little child was watching 6 hours of television a day. Now that was 50 years ago. Between this and the boob tube,
That's all they do.
you know, when my aunts and uncles would come to the house, that was a big deal. My mother had 7 sisters. They could all Irish step dance. They all played the piano. They all sang. You know, it was wonderful. Today when we visit, you know, oh, are we going to see the children?
No.
You know, I don't even, grandnieces, grandnephews, I don't know.
This is a very important part of conversations that sometimes start that say, how did we get where we are today? Considering it a bit of a mess.
Early childhood is so important. When I was in Oakmont, where I was a resource teacher, we had the first 4-year-old program in the United States. And it was a very, and still free, nobody paid. First 4-year-old. But anyway, let's go next door. Over here.
I absolutely love your black and whites.
That's the first time I've ever used white paint. This is amazing. Now, when I talk about basic schizophrenia, you know, you see the non-objective pieces and the abstract pieces and the still lifes, and you come in here and look at this. I will say I am a Pennsylvania boy. You know, educated in Pennsylvania, lived in Western Pennsylvania, and although I spent 6 months in Florida, I wouldn't even consider painting a palm tree. They're just not part of my vocabulary or my understanding. But a painting like this was almost a month on location. I don't use white paint, and you can say, well, where did these start? You know, and that first brush stroke begins a new life. When I did this painting, the action was the water. So I started doing some of these stones and sort of suggesting the water around it. And this is as close to pointillism almost as you can get, because they're tiny little brush strokes on a dry surface. If it were a wet surface, you could never put that amount of pigment on a wet surface. So these are painstakingly done. I'm there, I tell everybody sometimes, funny story, chipmunks or squirrels sometimes will come and sit on my shoe. However,
They want to
Did you
walk.
feed them?
I'm always afraid they're looking for a stray nut.
Right.
They're there just so long and boom, off they go. But when I'm out there by myself, you know, like the Falling Water exhibition that I did, I stayed in the cabin at Falling Water, and this was in the fall. And lights out at 7 o'clock. In those days, the cabins were a little more primitive than the palace that they have recently built in comparison. But anyway, I painted the bridge that goes into Bear Run. There's a big bridge there in the town. I'm right under the bridge. The bridge is here. I'm right here on a couple big rocks, and the water at that time of the year wasn't running. And I have a table and a chair, and I was there for like 2 weeks, painting that stream that was like whoosh, right in my face. And when I did this piece, there's a piece of cement that was cantilevered out over the water. The old rustic owl on 22, and the fishermen, and I'd be painting there, and it's a trout stream, and the fishermen would come in and I'd say, hello, you know, they'd be casting. I'm here first. You want to cast here? You get here before I do. That was a really wonderful experience. This painting, when I did this painting, I did that painting last year. And I like the beginning of fall. I don't like full fall, it's almost too much color, too much excitement. When I finished that painting, there was not a leaf to be seen.
Right.
Yeah.
So from memory.
And something like this, these would be just a contour line, a very simple contour line. No, nothing more than that. All these lines of color had to be preserved. So I had to paint behind them. And like a line like this, or a line like this. Anyway, that's another piece. This piece behind it, this is one of my favorite scenes. And there's a Mennonite couple that bought this piece, and they don't buy art. And they live not too far from this, and said they just absolutely had to have it. And I wanted them to come to the preview, and they didn't feel real comfortable. But anyway, this stream, funny story, I painted, and I go back to certain scenes, you know, like Cezanne, I mean, he painted some scenes 25, 30 times. I've done about 4 paintings maybe 5 paintings of the same scene. Unfortunately, they cut this tree, and I don't like the tree. I mean, they trimmed it, so I don't like it anymore. But anyway, there was one time that there was hardly any water in the stream. It was hot. I'm out in the middle of the stream because there was hardly any water. It was hot. I had a big table, chair, whatever. And there's cows on this side, and I'm painting, and the cows went over to that side. I thought, oh, okay. And then I didn't pay too much attention to them, and I didn't have a shirt on. It was hot, and all of a sudden I felt this big, wet thing on my back. And I hollered, ah! You know, and I grabbed the painting, and here's a cow licking the back. He thought it was a human salt stick. But anyhow, and there's a farmer watching this.
Oh, that's great.
And the farmer got the biggest truck, he just left. He said, you know, they are very curious creatures. And they wonder what you were doing there. So they went from here to behind. And I'm raised in the city, you know. I live in the country now. But, you know, there's still, you know, horns or what, but that was that piece. But I love this piece. And especially where they've cut through, you know, the utility companies have cut through and cleared. And I did a whole series of paintings with those little cut throughs that are sort of fun, break up the space. But something like this would be done first, simple contour lines, and just start dabbling and doing the tree. And all of this would have been, I worked from front to back, foreground to background. Just the opposite of how anybody teaches.
Well, now what did you say over there about having to preserve the little yellow branches? That sounds like the back was there.
Yeah, sometimes. But this is so close. This is like, this is almost all foreground. There's hardly any depth to this.
Flat.
This, in some ways, this is not too unlike my non-objective pieces. All that linear description.
Yeah.
This piece over here, I said I don't work from photographs. I'm always on location. However, I was in my sister Joan for her 70th birthday. Took her to a trip to the Canadian Rockies. And politically, we're like this. She's on one side, I'm on the other side, and kind of what we survived. We survived. But anyhow, we were hiking in the Canadian Rockies in late October. And we're there just, you know, and unfortunately, we were dumb enough, we had dinner bells for the grizzlies. Nobody told us that the grizzlies were attracted to dinner bells. Especially the old grizzlies that can't, you know, they're going into hibernation and, you know, they will.
I think it's dinner time.
Exactly. But anyway, we came upon a site of sort of like Canadian birch that was snow covered. It was early morning. It was absolutely breathtakingly awesome. And this is one of the few pieces I have ever done without a photograph. And I also splattered it with white paint. That I never used white paint. I used to never say never. It's always the first. Pieces like this, I used to do sweeping vistas, like that piece. And I could go outside and in 3 minutes, 5 minutes, find a beautiful scene to paint. You know, between the billboards and all the development and the roads. I used to try to beat Schuster. Everywhere they were planting highways and it was a beautiful vista, I would go out there and paint it before it was destroyed. But
Careful, he's related to Schuster.
those vistas are rapidly disappearing. And the Conservancy does a nice job trying to protect a lot of them. But so now I'll take something that's very ordinary, smack in your face in anybody's backyard, and paint it to show how extraordinary it is if you look.
Like a pansy.
Pardon me?
Like a pansy.
I could some ways be a pantheist, you know, like paintings like that. That's my natural cathedral. We'll come in here just for a couple minutes and then lunch. Any questions?
Michael, I have a question.
Yes.
Some of yours are matted, but a lot of them are, the whole sheet is mounted on the backboard.
Okay, good question. Someone just asked, and this young lady helped install this exhibition, why are some of my paintings matted and some of them not matted? Like this is matted, So this wasn't done on French paper. This is the best French paper you can buy. So I tried to show that white edge just to show how abstract painting is. You may look at this and say it's a representational scene. However, it starts here. And I like to show that edge because that's how I start. Now, where they're matted, sometimes they're not my best paper. But this I consider one of the best watercolors, best winter landscapes I've ever done. And when I do a winter landscape like this, I would freeze my you-know-what off. I would put a piece of cardboard down, then a rug, and a table, and a chair. And if the water started crystallizing on the paper, I knew I had to stop because I could get frostbite. So I'd paint for 2 hours and go get a cup of coffee and wait to see if it was going to get warmer. But it had to be 32 degrees when you're using watercolor. This piece over here, I did coming down Crescent Mountain. And again, the white is the white of the paper, and it's preserved. You know, I don't put that white, I don't paint that white in, I protect the white of the surface. And this painting almost took me a month and was one of my all-time favorite places to paint. And I'm over here, and there was a storm, and usually I took my table and chairs with me because I've had them stolen. But it was so difficult coming across all this and, you know, up and over these rocks. And there was a storm, and there went my table, my chair. And then this big branch came in. And fortunately, I had started here, but by the time I finished, this thing was there. And today, I love this scene, but it is filled with stuff like this. But almost a month on that. And here's some drawings, again. Now, I would never draw like this to paint like that. But I did these drawings just to show, like, you can say, well, don't you draw? I draw with the brush. I don't need to draw with a pencil. So the brush has replaced the pencil. And after I do something like this, I say, thank God, because this takes a long time. These are all in my backyard.
Those are great.
Thank you.
Did those without any white paint?
No, but however, I tried to protect the whites of the paper, still.
Oh, that's amazing.
And the whites of the paper,
Uh-huh.
very important.
Wow.
Yes,
Why do you consider that your best?
one of my best. It's just, it's so fresh, and I love the little bit of color in it. And it's a warm spring day where the snow is just thawing. And I've done that scene several times. And what's happened now is it's totally grown in. Totally grown. But these, I can't think of what, these are beech. I think these are beech. I can't think of the tree. The leaves stay all the way to the spring.
Isn't that an oak, like a white oak?
No, it's not an oak.
This is beach.
Not an oak.
I had those in the driveway of my homestead, and that's a beach, and they lasted all winter long.
Yeah, and I love them in the spring because you have, and winter landscapes, unlike summer landscapes, very few people who use watercolor paint in summer. Why? Much, much harder. First of all, limited access to greens. You know, and all my greens are all mixed. You know, they're not out of the, people say, what big green is that? And I'll say, I haven't a clue. You know, and even from a technical perspective, I don't think about colors, you know, that's all second nature. I'm focused on idea, not necessarily how I'm painting. But in watercolor, in the winter, you know, all of this is just suggested, the white of the paper. And it's 10 times easier than this. And sometimes I'll say, I will never paint another fern as long as I live. They're so hard. But, and again, this is a close perspective showing how magnificent it is. And anybody living in Pennsylvania that's near woods has this in their backyard. Versus like a vista, like across the way.
Michael, is there anything different about this one? It feels different to me.
It is a dark mood.
Yeah.
This is the essence of spring, happy thoughts, wonderful thoughts. A little more edge, a little edge to this.
So what does that tell you about somebody that's attracted to that?
Yeah, everybody's attracted to different things, and and again, this is a small. Oh, and that's a picture of me in my garden. But very seldom do I ever paint in my garden, because gardening is like one giant canvas. It's never finished. I'm always adding, deleting. But every once in a while there might be some flowers in there that I'll individually focus. But to actually make a painting of my garden, different art form. I don't do it.
Michael, you've got a lot of eclectic art, but there's no cows in your paintings.
No what?
No people or
house.
cows.
Oh, good observation. Everybody will love this. No people in my painting. And I say to that, I directed an art museum for 24 and a half years. With a 40-member board. And as a principal, supervisor, no people. I share people, but a good observation. Excellent observation. And I love to respond to the question. Any other questions?
Thank you.
You've been very attentive, wonderful audience. Thank you for coming, and there is lunch downstairs.